I wanted to, I've explored this idea. I think I posted about this before in the community, but I'm always interested in, expanding my ability to do JavaScript stuff. And what I'm trying to do here is set up an environment, an instance where I can load all of my web viewer stuff, and then I can go fetch data, because that's typically what a web page would do. Is it would load all of the stuff around it. In fact, it would also load a skeleton of something, either like a loading word, or it would load. You see a skeleton. If you know what I'm talking about there, it's just like a gray boxes that represent the data that will eventually show up. So that's what a web page would do. That's what web apps do. That's what an iOS app does. What I teach in my course, at least at the beginning, is that we can pass the data in from FileMaker at the same time that the JavaScript is loaded, and that the stuff is rendered on the screen. And that's a perfectly good way. Claris gave us that option, and so we can do it. I don't have any problem with that, but there's always a chance that, instead of trying to load 10,000 records into a table, I can just load 1,000, and then I can go periodically fetch data and get more data and return it back to the web viewer. Or I can load I can load all of the JavaScript into the web viewer and then have it go fetch its own data. There's something appealing to that as well. So I mentioned this. This is where I kind of am struggling with my own understanding, so I know I'm not going to explain it well. But I think in JavaScript, there's a concept called a promise, and maybe other people have better ideas than I do, where you ask it to go fetch data, and the JavaScript will put together a promise, will create a promise that says, eventually I'm going to get data back, and I'm going to give it back to you. I promise that I will give you this data back from wherever I'm fetching it, or I'm going to return a failed status. So I think that's what the rough idea of a promise is I'm going to go get it, and eventually it'll come back. When that thing is resolved, either through success or through failure, then we can do something with the data. And as far as I understand, there's a keyword in JavaScript called await that takes this function here that I'm running, and it pauses the entire function from running the rest of it until this resolves, until I get data back. Again, either as a success or as a timeout or something. So this await keyword will pause everything else from running. There could be 100 lines inside of this code block, but none of them will run until this function returns either success or fail. This can be done, this await keyword can be done inside of a function here that is marked as async. Async, just as we know what async means, perform script on server, wait for completion, is this function is going to run, and somewhere inside of this function, I'm going to have to pause and wait for data back. This is just telling the web browser this function cannot be run straight through with no stopping. At some point, I'm going to have to stop and get data. I'm going to have to wait for something. So I think that's my basic understanding of it, and I'm constantly checking to see if that's correct. Does anybody have any thoughts or better understandings or questions about that? No? Nope. Y'all can hear me still, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, I think you have explained it, quite well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm a simple man, so I try to explain things simply.
Yeah, just remember when you use async, you will use await. They
Yep.
will go in pair. Yeah.
That's right. If I remove the async, my VS Code is going to tell me that this keyword is invalid. Cannot use keyword await outside of an async function. So I have to put that up here. So that's nice. That's a go ahead.
If you use await after async, doesn't that mean that it's no longer really truly async because it's not going to do anything until it's got a result?
If you use async or await after async, what do you mean?
Just because the async implies that you're performing an asynchronous function, right?
Yeah, that's what this is. Yep.
But then if you're then using an await command, you're basically saying, well, don't do anything until I've got something back from this function, and therefore it's no longer asynchronous. Because
well, I think that's what isn't that what asynchronous means, that this function will not run line after line after line after line without stopping. At some point it's going to stop. That's how I think about it. Maybe I'm missing the key of what async really means. Async means things could happen out of sequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they'll resolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's
how it was explained to me. And async and then defer was the other, the other way of doing it. So defer would put it to the end. Async does it in line.
Okay. So yeah, that could be. You're right. So maybe other things could happen while we're waiting for the data to come back. And then the problem is, and maybe this is where, I need to add some more information here, some more coding, but I have to wait for this data to get back, and then I can do something with it. And I think maybe that keyword then, because that's certainly is a keyword in JavaScript. I think I could write this data, or I could say inside of this await function, or inside of this async function, I could say await, and then I can add a then to it and take the results and do something with the results. But maybe this stuff has to resolve, and anything inside of the then function or method won't actually run. So maybe you were right, Lee, that I could have 100 other lines of code here, and those all run, and this is stuck in its own no man land, waiting for the data to come back. So anyway, so I've been kind of working through this, understanding it. And Josh Willing wrote a library called FM Gopher that has this built in. We can use his function as an await thing, an await function, so that we can use it to go fetch data. I'm actually not sure. Now that I think about this, I'm not sure if I could have just used the regular FileMaker.perform script. Maybe I could have, but I've been using Josh's implementation for a while now to go fetch data at different times whenever it's needed. So let me just run this and see what happens. I can't remember what's going to happen. And so the idea is that I in the VS Code, I run a load data function as my normal. I run that function, and this is what I'm trying to do, is trying to see what the result is. So I don't think any of this is going to work, but we'll see what happens here. So I'm going to put on the debugger in FileMaker. We're going to watch this. Rusty, in your course, you've come across this async stuff?
Yeah, it was in the async. Well, there's two ways. Defer, which defers it to the end of the code from reading it from top to bottom, no matter where it's at. And async runs the code in line, letting everything below it run.
Okay. So what just happened was, I'll run this again. I'm running this script. It hits that perform JavaScript in a web viewer with the load data. That's this function right here. That function runs. And immediately, because that function has that fetch data gopher, immediately we see that load data script get called. That load data script was called right here. And the way that Josh has built this and what has to be is that his function provides us a callback name, a promise ID, and then a parameter. So the parameter is any stuff that I want to send from the JavaScript back to FileMaker. In this case, I don't have anything. I just noticed that it timed out. And this is a key part of a promise is at a certain point, it's going to time out and say, I can't get to fetch the data. You handle the error. So I have to start this again and let it run a little bit. Actually, what I'll do is I'll put inside of the FM Gopher script, I'm going to put in a 0 here as the third parameter to say, don't ever time out. Just always be waiting for the data so that I can pause it. All right. So go back to FileMaker. Let's rerun this. So every time I call this, it's giving me a callback name and a promise ID. And these will be so here's my callback name and my promise ID. These are unique things that are generated by the Josh's library. Oh, it timed out already. Did that not save? Oh, it didn't save. That's why. So let me start over here. All right, I didn't save it. So boom, 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 call. And the idea is that it goes fetches the data using FileMaker execute data API. It sets it into a variable. And then here's where it's going to send it back. This last line is going to go, we're going to perform this function that was generated by the library, the promise. We're going to go find the right promise to work with using the promise ID. And we're going to send the promise this results. And so when we do that, the data comes back, and it actually worked. The data comes back as I need it to be. So now I can do something with that. And actually, I'm not sure where this is. So let's see where this is. Why didn't that work? I don't know what happened. All right, let's try it again. Boom. All right, so console, there's my data. It was, 567. Okay, so it is right there. All right, so here's my data right here. This is what came back. Let's rerun that. Yep, there's my data. Great. Right now it's as a string. So what I can do over here in VS Code is parse this baby. I think this, Rusty, you had a good idea about the defer versus the inline. I think this then is kind of a defer too, because it's saying don't do anything or do the stuff extra here once you get the data back.
Yeah, I haven't got to them yet. That's new to me, but I like it.
So there we go. Okay, so there we go. So, oops, you didn't see that. So we run it. It goes and fetches the data, and there it is. The data is all there for me, ready to go. And then what I can do with it is I could do all sorts of things. I could say, I'm going to go into we'll wrap up here in a minute, but I've got, let me just do a quick pre-ID equals output. We'll do that. Okay, and then I'm going to go into my JavaScript and I say then const Data equals that, and then I'll say, I guess I'll do that, return data. And then in here, I will say document const output div equals document.get element by ID. Output, here, I'll make it bigger so you can see that. And then I'll say output, there we go. I guess I want that. All right, so let's see what this does. Okay. So that didn't work because the data did not come out. So for the hell of it right now, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say, I'm going to put this up into here. And just say, after you get the data back, then set the inner HTML. We'll see if this works. I don't know. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I load it, it fetches it, and then it returns it. And then I can put in, let's do this. So beautiful. Okay. So we're on the right track, and we're a little bit over time, but I'm getting it. So I'm in essence here, I'm loading my code into the web viewer. After the code is loaded, I'm going to fetch the data, and then I am placing it in here. So if I did a loading, let's say I did a loading here. I started with that loading, load it, and then it just switches over once the data comes back. Okay. I think I'm getting the hang of this. It's interesting to me that I couldn't do that stuff here. So I have to figure that out. Why didn't this stuff work down here? When I return the data, I should be able to send this. Oh, sorry, you can't see. So this async function should be able to return the data after it's gotten back inside the then. Actually, I wonder if I should do this. Const result equals that, and then return results. There we go. Maybe that was it. But then the result gets put in here. So let's try that. Nope, that didn't work. I'm not sure what's going on. I
might be wrong, but isn't this because what's happening in the await doesn't get passed to that window load data below, because that's already executed prior to what you're getting from the await function? That's right. You're right. The await so runs in isolation, doesn't it? So anything that happens after that needs to run within that function, does it?
Well, you reminded me. I could double this up and put another await async here, async await. Let's see if this works. There we go. That worked. You're right. You're right. It ran in isolation. This code already had run because, again, this was not an async function, but because I made it an async function now and I waited for it, now I'm able to work with it. So this function, the only thing it needs to do is get the data, right? Fetch the data. That's the only thing it needs to do. And that's the only thing that it should do because it's called fetch. Outside of that function, I then can do with it what I want to do. Good call. Thanks for reminding me of that. So, you know, to get even crazier, I could, and you know, I'll stay on for a little bit longer. I got nothing else to do. Well, no, I have a lot to do. I have a course to get done. Doug's not here. He's probably mad at me because I don't have the course done yet. So, so what I could do inside of this thing is I could pass in a query. So part of this is a parameter that I could pass in. I could create a query that just has a couple things. I could say limit 10. Then I could pass in the query, JSON.stringify query. All right. So FileMaker is going to get the query. Over here in FileMaker, I'm going to get that value in here. So rather than, let's do this. Let me see if this will work. I'm going to change this to request because this is basically my request that I'm passing in. And I want the limit, it doesn't matter. I want the limit to be only 10 records because that's what it's defined here. So let's see. I'm just going to run it and see if it worked. Yeah, it worked. So let's see what that did. All right, so it runs, it loads, immediately that's called. I've got an error there. My request here starts with the limit of 10. That's the only thing I need to pass in. The rest of it can be passed in or can be constructed via FileMaker, although I don't really agree with having the construction of the query in two different places. So it goes and fetches the data and it returns only 10 records. Very nice. I could say, let the limit be 1. And it goes and fetches 1 record. Very nice. So what I had thought in my head was, let's get to this point, and then I wanted to add a button that would go fetch data every dang time and just keep adding more records one at a time to it, or whatever the limit was. But I kind of got stuck on all of this. But this seems to be the key, and this is going to be, now that I've explained it with you guys, I can better teach it in a course. But this function has to be an async function. I wonder if this then stuff really is necessary. Let me just take it out and see, because I haven't used that. Let's start over. Okay, then, so let's do that. Let's take that out. And I'm going to say JSON.parse results. See if this works. Yeah, okay, so it still works. So I didn't need that then. So it feels like what's happening is this is still waiting for the data, and then it's finishing this function by returning that out. So I didn't need that then. That then was superfluous. If I needed to parse the data some way, I could do the then, or add to it, or manipulate it in some way, like we do in the course. Maybe the then. I'm not sure what the then is there for right now, but anyway. So this has to be async await, and the function that is calling the async function needs to also be, because Lee was exactly right. This stuff already runs, and it doesn't get a chance to get the data. And I think we could prove that by doing this. If I took out the async, I took out the await, and I said, or hi. Actually, I'll do. There we go. I'll just do that. Let's see if this proves if this. Nope, that still wasn't right, because I was hoping it would pick one of these two. It hadn't got this yet, so it just picked up this and kept going, but not sure why the data value is empty. But anyway, so there we go. I was able to struggle through it with you all, and I came out a little bit ahead and not so much falling on my face, so that's great. Proofgeist has one too. I'll send you the documentation of this stuff. GitHub. Let's have to look it up.
And if this was like you said, if this was looping in a way, if it was fetching chunks of data and feeding them back, how would you get to that step? Would you sort of loop this function?
Yeah. Let's try it.
So
I
at
got
the
time.
end,
Let's see what we can do. So what I would do is, let's get it to work. Okay. So it's working right now. What I would do is I would build a button here. I'll put a button inside of my VS Code or inside of here. Button, fetch data, an ID of fetch. Okay, there we go. We got a nice button. What I would do is, fetch it. Fetch. Okay. Then I'm going to go to my JavaScript and add a inside of my JavaScript. Let's see, inside of the load data, I'm going to say const button equals. I don't want that. I want button fetch.
I think you missed the H in the HTML.
I think. Okay, let me see. Let me make sure. Yeah, I put it back. I put it there.
Oh, you did. Okay.
So, all right. So then I'll say button dot add event listener. Click an async function. So what I would do, here's what I would do. And this, you're challenging me here, which is great. Love it. First of all, this function up here would take in a parameter. So it's going to take in a limit. No, it's going to take in an offset. The limit is always going to be 1. It's going to take out an offset. And the offset, I'm going to say the offset by default is 0. Getting an error here. Can I do that? Okay. So now what's wrong with this here? Just didn't finish it. Load data. Oh yeah, I'm not finished here. Oh, here let's redo some things here because I got into a mess. The oh, that's why. Here we go. Okay. So let's go back here, do offset. So the offset is going to be what is going to count up. I'm going to pass in an offset of like, I think I've got this. So let's try this. So I'm going to do first, the next thing I'm going to do is const, actually, let's do this. I've got the div that up here, const output length equals output div.innerHTML.length. Okay, so the length of the length over here is now 1, I think, I hope. And that's what I'm going to pass in because I want the offset to be the length of this right here, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's right. So we'll see if this works. Go back to VS Code, output length. What's going on here? Output length. How is that? Output length. That's interesting that it can't read it. Let's just do this. So I'm going to just make sure that this works. I'm going to comment that out. All right. So over here in FileMaker, run it. The length is 13. Oh. Okay, so then I need to do this a different way.
Can you count the objects?
Well, that's what the length is supposed to do, but I think it's because it's stringified. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's do cons. I think because it's stringified, it's counting 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, I don't know what it's doing. I don't know. I'm gonna have to figure this out. But that was the whole idea, is be able to fetch data one at a time. I know I'm very close, but I'm just, let's see. Okay. Button.add event listener. Async. Wait, what? I'm going to do async. Fetch gopher. There we go. Wait, what? No. I don't need that. Okay, let's see. Why is that broken? Oh, sorry. You can't see that. Sorry. Maybe I don't need that. Okay. Okay, so I'm attaching the function here as well. Okay, so actually, this is a little bit more complex. This function would work fine, but it's just not going to do anything. So I have a little bit more work to do, and actually, I don't think I have the time to do this. So how about we put a pause on this and figure out and continue on this next week, or maybe I'll put together a video. But was this interesting anyway?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, okay.
Good to be back.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, good to see you all.
Thanks.
Joe, Mark, Sam, thanks for sticking around. We'll play with this more next week. So lots of fun.
Cool.
All right, folks.
Yeah.
See you all later.
See you
Mark.
later.
Hey, everyone. So right after we got done with office hours, I stood up, took a break, and I realized how to fix this issue. I think Lee had finished asking me, or had asked at the end, like, how would you use that button to fetch new data? So I was not getting it correct during the time, but I figured it out right after. So I thought I would show you that. Here's what it looks like. So let me show you in FileMaker. We load it, we get one record, and then this button press will go fetch one record at a time. And it's hard to tell, but there's just a tad of bit of a delay because it's fetching the record one at a time. So that's kind of cool. You know, we could do a ton of things with this. We could, yeah, I don't know. So anyway, I wanted to show how this is done. I am going to remove what I did. So I'm going to go over to the JavaScript and remove it. Take a screenshot of it to make sure I remember how to do it. There we go. All right, now I'm going to remove it, and now I'll show you the code, and I'll walk through it again. So the first thing I did was I started with, we did this before. I added a button to the div, and I added I added an event listener, which was a click, and this DOM here. I actually don't need this, so I'm going to remove this. Just realized that. Okay, so this update DOM function, let's just write that quick. Const update DOM equals, this is just going to be a function. It will be async, but we're not going to worry about it right now. So first thing we'll do, console log, just make sure that this is attached to that button. Go to FileMaker and run it. What did I do? Run it. Great, I solved one problem. Oh, shoot, no, I don't want to remove that. I don't know why I did that. That was silly. Oh, const output div, there we go. Okay, so now it knows where to put the dang data. There we go. Okay, so we got one, and then when I hit this fetch data, I'm going to get a console log that says hi. That's perfect. That's great. Okay, so in order to do this, in order to go fetch more data, I need to know how many records are already in here, because I only want to fetch one more record than what's already here. So I have to figure out the length of what's here. This would be a little bit easier in React if I were to use React to do this, because I could actually store the length of this array that was returned. Every time it gets returned, I could store it in a variable, in a state variable. Here, I'm not going to do that because I don't have React. So what I'll do is instead, I'm going to get the length of this div. I'm going to get the length of the contents of this div, which happens to be an array. So let's do that. I'll just copy this, paste it up here, and I'll say const contents equals output div.innerHTML. And then I'm going to say const, array equals contents is json.parse contents. So I can turn that string that's inside of the div into an array, a JavaScript array. And then I'll find const length equals array.length. Okay. And now I will do a quick check on the length. So let's go over to FileMaker, run this, fetch, and it should return 1. Great. If I were to go into VS Code and say my limit is 100 and fetch data, so I'm going to get 100 records back, and this is telling me, yep, it's 101. It's actually, it got 101 records because it got 100 plus 1 is 100 and 1. Okay, good. Okay, so we'll go back to the 1. All right, so now that I know the length, I can pass that value into this FM or this fetch data function and override this default. By default, limit is set to 1 unless the calling function, unless wherever I call this function passes in a new value. So I happen to have a new value in this length. So all I can say is const data equals fetch data gopher length. So I'm passing in the length. I'm passing in 1, and that'll do 1 plus 1 right here, and that'll be 2. So then it'll fetch 2 records. And then once I get the data back, I will put into the inner HTML that data stringified. So I'm really replacing what's already in there, but that shouldn't be a problem. So we're getting a couple errors here. Fetch data, that's a problem, and that's because we don't have this async. So now I need to put this as an await, and this function needs to be an async function. So there we go. So let's see what that does. This is, by the way, this is the 3rd time I've recorded this video, so it better be perfect. All right. Let's try that again. What's going on? Why am I getting 2? Because I have VS Code. The limit needs to be 0 to start. There we go. All right. So back here, run, boom, 1. There we go. So now it's looking at the length of what's in here, the contents of this div. It is then sending that value to that async function, using that in the query. And there we go. So now we can do all sorts of things with this. That's great. I'm loving this. I was just thinking, like, what else could I do with this? I could say, I don't know. I was thinking, like, maybe I just want to do 5 records at a time and then replace them with new 5 records. There's all sorts of possibilities. But I did I was able to solve the question that was brought up, the idea that was brought up, and this is really what I wanted to do, but I couldn't get there in the time. So anyway, that's it. This function right here, which is attached to the button, gets does all the work. This is the function that returns the data, and then this puts it into its place. So there we go. I may, I don't really like this. I'm going to do this. I think this will be okay. I'm going to copy these, cut them. I'm going to create a new file called utils.js and paste that in there and export fetch data, Gopher, and update DOM. I do need to bring in this, copy, cut, put that in here because this is where it's actually used. And then I need to import fetch data Gopher and utils. I want to do that. And what was the other one? Update DOM. Jeez. The more I write JavaScript, the more I like to separate things. This is the initial function, but these are other functions that are needed, but they could be separated. So it just makes the code. Let's just make sure this works. Okay. Yep, works just like normal, but instead I was able to separate it out. When I do a deploy, let's just make sure that the deploy will work. npm run deploy to fm. It got sent over here. And turn off dev mode, run. There we go. Great. Oh, this is so awesome. Very nice. All right. So thanks for being part of this conversation today. Appreciate your thoughts and your fixing my code and all that. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.